You know, sometimes life throws you into situations you could never imagine handling, and when you think about them later, you still feel that sting of disbelief as if it just happened yesterday. Before I even get into my story, I want to say this: if you've ever felt hurt by someone you trusted, if you've ever had your heart broken by the actions of family, then stick around, because what I'm about to share will not only shock you, but it may remind you that you're not alone. And before we dive deep into this painful memory of mine, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that subscribe button, because this channel is all about sharing real, raw experiences that most people never talk about, and I know you'll find a piece of your own journey reflected here. Now let me take you back to the day it happened, because it wasn't just about hair, it was about betrayal, about cruelty, and about the kind of wound that words can leave on a parent's heart. My daughter was only 7 years old at the time, full of innocence, joy, and the kind of sparkle that every parent treasures. She had the most beautiful, long, flowing hair that she loved, hair that I had carefully braided so many mornings before school, hair that made her feel like a little princess when she looked into the mirror. And more than that, it was a part of her identity, something she adored and took pride in. But one day, in the span of a few cruel minutes, my own sister, my daughter's aunt, decided to strip her of that joy, and with it, she left scars that went far deeper than the scalp. It all started when my sister came over to stay with us for a few days. She and I have had a complicated relationship, full of ups and downs, and though she always carried a sharp tongue, I never thought she would take her bitterness out on my child. At first she seemed friendly, smiling at my daughter, complimenting her dress, and acting like the caring aunt everyone expects in a family. I wanted to believe this was a chance to patch up old wounds between us, maybe to heal some of the grudges that had lingered for years, but underneath that smile was something darker, something I couldn't see until it was too late. I remember the exact moment that things took a turn. I was in the kitchen preparing lunch, and my daughter was in the living room, giggling and watching cartoons. My sister went upstairs, saying she wanted to rest for a while. I didn't think much of it, but when the house grew oddly quiet, that silence started gnawing at me. I called out for my daughter, no response. Then I heard a faint buzzing sound, something that made my heart skip. I rushed upstairs, and there, in the bathroom, my world shattered. My daughter sat on the stool, tears streaming down her cheeks, her once long hair falling in clumps to the floor, and standing behind her was my sister, holding an electric shaver in her hand, eyes cold, with a look of twisted satisfaction on her face. I froze for a moment, my brain unable to register the cruelty of what I was seeing. I shouted her name, asking what on earth she thought she was doing, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she turned to me, and with words so sharp they cut deeper than any blade, she said, she needed to be taught that she's not some little princess. Life isn't about looking pretty. Maybe now she'll stop thinking she's better than everyone else. Those words, cruel, venomous, dripping with bitterness, broke me in ways I still can't fully explain. My daughter was sobbing, clutching her arms around herself, trying to understand why someone she trusted would do this to her. And me, I stood there torn between rage and heartbreak, unable to believe that my own flesh and blood could do something so heartless. I can still remember the sound of my daughter's cries echoing in that bathroom, a sound so raw that it pierced my soul in a way I will never forget. Her little hands trembled as she touched her now uneven, half-shaved head, as if she couldn't quite believe what had been taken from her. And in that moment, something inside me snapped, not in anger alone, but in the kind of primal protectiveness only a parent can feel. I rushed forward, yanked the shaver out of my sister's hand, and shouted at her with a fury I didn't even know I had in me. But even then, she looked me dead in the eyes, completely unremorseful, and repeated those cruel words, almost like she wanted to twist the knife deeper. She needed this. You're raising her to be weak, to care about silly things like hair. You're ruining her. Can you imagine hearing that from someone who's supposed to love your child? Can you imagine the helplessness of watching your daughter shrink into herself because of words and actions that never should have been inflicted on her? My daughter buried her face in my chest, sobbing uncontrollably, and I held her so tightly, whispering over and over, "You are beautiful, you are strong, and I love you." But even as I said those words, I knew they couldn't erase the trauma that had just been carved into her little heart. Later that evening, after the mess of hair had been swept up and my daughter had cried herself into an exhausted sleep, I sat alone on the couch, staring at the darkened room and wondering how everything had spiraled into such cruelty. Memories started flooding back, memories of my sister and me as children. I remembered how, even then, she had always been harsh, always competitive, always trying to tear me down instead of lifting me up. She used to mock me in front of friends, make cutting remarks about my looks, and criticize everything I did. And yet, through all of that, I had tried to keep her close, believing that family was family, that maybe one day she would soften. I thought maybe becoming an aunt would change her, that she would see in my daughter the chance for a fresh start. But instead, it was as if all the bitterness she had carried for years had been redirected toward the one person who deserved it the least. I sat there asking myself over and over, why? Why would she do this? Was it jealousy? Was it resentment? Or was it just cruelty for cruelty's sake? And then I remembered the look in her eyes when she shaved those locks off. It wasn't the look of someone teaching a lesson. It was the look of someone trying to break another person, to assert control, to steal joy simply because she couldn't stand to see someone else happy. That realization left me shaking. I had always believed in forgiveness, always believed that no matter how much family hurts you, you find a way to heal. But this felt unforgivable. Because it wasn't just me she hurt. It was my daughter. And when you harm a child, you cross a line that can never be uncrossed. The next morning, when my daughter woke up, she avoided the mirror. She kept her little hoodie pulled up, trying to hide what had been done to her. I told her we could go, get her a beautiful hat or maybe a cute scarf to wear until her hair grew back. But she just shook her head and whispered, "Why did Auntie hate me?" That question broke me all over again. How do you explain to a child that sometimes people's cruelty has nothing to do with them and everything to do with the emptiness inside the other person? I hugged her again and told her she was perfect, that no one's actions could take away her worth. But inside, I knew the damage was done, and, as I looked at her, so fragile, so wounded, I promised myself something. This would never happen again. My sister had shown me who she truly was, and now it was up to me to protect my daughter, not just from strangers in the world, but from family who couldn't be trusted. The days that followed were some of the hardest I have ever faced as a mother. Not because of the physical damage that was done, hair grows back, after all, but because of the invisible scars that clung to my little girl's heart. Every morning before school, I would try to help her get ready, like I always did, but she resisted even the simplest routines. She no longer wanted me to braid her hair, of course, because there was nothing left to braid. Instead, she would pull her hoodie tight around her head, refusing to take it off even at the breakfast table. When I gently asked her if she wanted to try on a cute hat I had bought for her, she just shook her head, her big brown eyes brimming with tears she was too tired to let fall. And when it came time to go to school, I noticed how she walked differently, shoulders hunched, gaze lowered, as though she was trying to shrink herself from the world's eyes. It killed me to see that transformation. My once bubbly, confident, laughter-filled little girl had turned into someone quiet, hesitant, and unsure of herself, all because of a cruel act, and even crueler words spoken by someone who should have been a safe figure in her life. That night, when I tucked her into bed, she whispered, "Mommy, will the kids at school laugh at me?" And my heart shattered again, because I couldn't promise her they wouldn't. I told her the only thing I could, even if they do, their laughter doesn't define you. You are so much more than your hair. You are kind, you are smart, and you are loved. But I could see in her eyes that she wasn't convinced, not yet. Trauma has a way of silencing the words of comfort, no matter how sincere they are. Meanwhile, my sister, the very person who caused this pain, acted like nothing had happened. She stayed in the guest room as if she hadn't torn my daughter's self-esteem apart. She came down from meals, scrolling through her phone, smirking at the television, and pretending the atmosphere in the house wasn't heavy with tension. I tried to ignore her at first, tried to focus all my energy on helping my daughter heal, but the anger inside me kept boiling. I couldn't just sit in the same room with her anymore. I avoided her, speaking only when absolutely necessary, and even then my words were clipped and cold. Eventually, I confronted her one night when my daughter was asleep. I stood in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, and asked her directly, "Do you even realize what you've done? Do you have any idea how much you've hurt her?" She didn't even look up from her phone at first. When she finally did, her eyes met mine, and she said with chilling calmness, "She'll get over it. You're just too sensitive." kids bounce back. That was the moment I realized we weren't just dealing with a mistake or a lapse in judgment. This was deliberate, and it came from a place of deep bitterness. My sister wasn't sorry. She didn't care. She believed she was right. The following weekend, my daughter and I went to the park to get some fresh air. I thought maybe being outdoors would lift her spirits, but even then she kept her hood up. A group of kids ran past us, laughing and playing, and for the first time I noticed how she pulled back, choosing to stay by my side instead of joining them like she normally would. She didn't want anyone to notice her, and that broke me all over again. When I asked her gently why she wasn't playing, she whispered, "They'll see my head." That was when I knew the damage was more than skin deep, and it wasn't just about hair anymore. It was about trust, self-worth, and identity. That night, after I tucked her into bed again, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the wall with tears rolling down my face. I couldn't believe I had allowed my sister into our home, given her space, food, comfort, and in return she had shattered something so precious. The anger inside me turned into a fierce determination. I realized I had been making excuses for my sister's behavior my entire life, tolerating her cruelty, overlooking her insults, convincing myself that family is family. But now I saw the truth. Family isn't defined by blood alone. Family is supposed to protect you, to lift you up, to love you. And anyone who tears you down, even if they share your blood, does not deserve a place in your life. So I made a decision that night, a decision that would change everything. I would no longer allow my sister to have access to my daughter. I didn't care if people called me harsh or unforgiving. I didn't care if other relatives thought I was being dramatic. My responsibility was to my child, and no one, not even my sister, would ever come before her safety and happiness again. I drafted a message to my sister the next morning, telling her she needed to pack her things and leave. When she read it, she scoffed, muttered something about me being overly emotional, but I stood my ground. For once, I didn't flinch. Under her dismissiveness, I looked her straight in the eye and said, "You hurt my daughter, and I will never forgive you for that. You are not welcome here anymore." She left that afternoon, slamming the door behind her, but I didn't care. The house felt lighter the moment she was gone, but the scars she left on my daughter's heart were still there. And I knew the real work was just beginning. I knew that helping my little girl rebuild her confidence, her joy, and her trust in the world would take time, patience, and endless love, and I was ready to give her all of it, because that's what mothers do. We fight for our children, even when it means walking away from people we once thought we couldn't live without. In the weeks that followed my sister's departure, I found myself constantly searching for ways to bring light back into my daughter's world. Every small smile she gave me felt like a victory, every tiny giggle like a piece of sunshine breaking through the clouds. But the truth is, healing doesn't happen overnight, especially for a child who had her innocence disrupted in such a cruel and personal way. There were mornings when she would sit on the edge of her bed, pulling at the hood of her sweatshirt as though it was a shield she couldn't bear to lower. When I suggested she leave it behind because the day was warm, she would shake her head stubbornly, whispering, "I don't want anyone to see me." And I would kneel down in front of her, stroke her cheek, and remind her, "You are beautiful just the way you are." Sometimes she believed me for a fleeting moment, and I'd catch the sparkle return to her eyes, but other times she would look away, still wrestling with the shadow my sister had cast over her. Those were the moments I wished I could carry her, pain myself, wished I could trade places with her, just to let her be free again. Slowly, though, we began to find little ways to mend the broken pieces. I took her shopping for colorful scarves and hats, letting her choose whichever ones made her feel happy. She picked a soft pink beanie with sparkly stars stitched into the fabric, and when she put it on, I saw her grin shyly at her reflection. That small grin was enough to make me feel like maybe, just maybe, we were on the right path. We also spent more time together doing activities she loved: painting, baking cookies, watching her favorite cartoons. The laughter that filled the kitchen as we smeared flour on each other's noses reminded me that joy was still possible, even after hurt. And little by little, her self-confidence began to peek through again. But no matter how much progress we made, there was still one question that lingered in her heart and mind too. One evening, while I was brushing her teeth before bed, she looked up at me with those big, questioning eyes and asked softly, "Why did Auntie do it? Why did she hate me?" That question was like reopening a wound, because I didn't have an easy answer. How do you explain malice to a child? How do you explain that sometimes people project their own bitterness onto others, even onto children, because they cannot handle their own pain? I took a deep breath and told her the truth, in the gentlest way I could. Sweetheart, Auntie didn't hate you. What she did says more about her than about you. Sometimes people hurt others because they are hurting inside, and they don't know how to deal with it. But it wasn't your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. She didn't respond right away, but she rested her head against my shoulder. And in that moment I knew she was trying to understand in her own way. Meanwhile, I was also wrestling with my own emotions, not just the anger and betrayal I felt toward my sister, but also the guilt I carried for letting her so close in the first place. I kept replaying the scene in my head, the sound of the shaver buzzing, my daughter's cries, my sister's venomous words. No matter how many times I told myself it wasn't my fault, a part of me still wondered if I should have seen the warning signs earlier. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that guilt wasn't going to help either of us heal. What mattered now was not blaming myself, but ensuring that my daughter knew she was safe, loved, and valued every single day. As time passed, her hair began to grow back, short and spiky at first, but full of promise. With every passing week, I could see her confidence slowly return. She started leaving her hood down more often, and even went to school one day wearing her pink beanie proudly. When she came home that afternoon, she told me that one of her classmates had said she looked super cool with her hat, and the pride in her voice was like music to my ears. That small comment from a peer meant more than 1,000 reassurances from me, because it came from someone her own age. And though I knew there would still be hard days ahead, I also knew we were moving in the right direction. Still, I couldn't shake the impact of what had happened. It had opened my eyes to a painful reality. Not everyone in your family is truly your family. Blood doesn't guarantee love, and sometimes the people who should protect you are the very ones who hurt you the most. I started setting firmer boundaries in my life, not just with my sister, but with anyone who tried to bring negativity into our world. I became fiercely protective of my daughter's peace, refusing to let anyone disturb it again, because when you've seen your child broken by the cruelty of another, you learn quickly that protecting their joy is more valuable than keeping toxic people close. And if that meant losing my sister, then so be it. I had gained something far more important, the resolve to fight for my daughter's happiness with every ounce of strength I had. Months later, when my daughter's hair had grown back into a soft, curly bob, she stood in front of the mirror one morning, tilted her head to the side, and smiled at her reflection for the first time in what felt like forever. That moment was more than just a milestone in her recovery. It was a symbol of resilience, of overcoming cruelty and finding strength again. I watched her brush her short hair with a look of pride, and my heart swelled with emotions I can hardly put into words. It wasn't just that her hair had returned, it was that her light had returned, piece by piece, day by day. And I realized then that no matter how deep the wound, love, patience, and support can help heal even the harshest scars. Still, the memory of what my sister did lingered like a shadow in the background of my mind. Family gatherings became complicated because I refused to let my sister near my daughter again, and of course, relatives had their opinions. Some tried to downplay what happened, saying things like, "It was just hair," or "She probably didn't mean it." But those people weren't there in that bathroom. They didn't see my daughter's tears, or hear those cruel words that cut like a knife. And that's when I knew I had to stop living for everyone else's approval. I didn't need to justify my choices. I didn't need to explain my boundaries. My duty was to my daughter, and protecting her would always come before protecting someone else's feelings. Over time, my daughter started to blossom again. She joined an art club at school, made a new group of friends, and began to laugh more freely. Watching her heal reminded me that children are stronger than we often give them credit for. Yes, they can be hurt deeply, but with love and encouragement, they can also rise again, stronger than before. I remember one particular evening when we were baking cookies together, and she suddenly looked at me with a serious expression and said, "Mommy, even if I didn't have hair forever, would you still think I'm beautiful?" I pulled her into my arms, kissed her forehead, and said, "Sweetheart, I would think you're beautiful even if you had no hair, no fancy clothes, nothing at all. Because beauty is not in how you look, it's in who you are. And you are the most beautiful girl in the world to me." She smiled then, a genuine smile that told me those words reached her heart. That was when I knew we had turned a corner. That is for my sister. She tried reaching out several times after she left, sending messages that ranged from dismissive to outright manipulative. At first, she mocked me for overreacting, but when she realized I wasn't giving in, her tone shifted. She started writing long apologies, claiming she hadn't meant to cause harm, that she just wanted to teach my daughter a lesson. But to me, those apologies rang hollow, because true remorse isn't about justifying your cruelty, it's about acknowledging it fully and accepting responsibility. And she had never done that, so I stood firm in my decision. I blocked her calls, ignored her messages, and made it clear that until she took real accountability, she had no place in our lives. It wasn't easy cutting ties with someone I had grown up with, but every time I looked at my daughter and remembered that moment in the bathroom, I knew I had made the right choice. Some wounds can heal, but the memory of betrayal remains, and sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away. This entire experience taught me something profound. That love isn't measured by blood, but by action. My daughter learned it too, that not everyone who calls themselves family will act like family. But more importantly, she learned that she will always have me in her corner, fighting for her, protecting her, and reminding her of her worth when the world tries to tear her down. And if you're watching this, maybe you've gone through something similar. Maybe someone you trusted hurt you, or worse, hurt your child. If so, I want you to know this. You are not alone, and you are stronger than you think. Don't ever let anyone convince you to keep toxic people in your life just because they're family. Your peace, your child's happiness, and your own mental well-being matter more than someone else's comfort. Before I end this story, let me leave you with this thought. Pain has a way of shaping us, but it doesn't have to define us. My daughter's hair grew back, but more importantly, her spirit grew stronger, and my bond with her grew deeper. Because we walked through that darkness together and came out on the other side. If you've been through something that shook you to your core, I hope this story reminds you that healing is possible, even when the wound feels permanent. And if this story touched you in any way, I'd love for you to join our little community. Here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because this channel is all about sharing real experiences, the kind that hurt, the kind that heal, and the kind that remind us we're not walking through life alone. Thank you for listening, and thank you for letting me share a piece of my heart with you.